Hey, it's Curly, and have you updated your startup trial decks yet? If not, this is the video for you. Today we'll go over each of the 6 bosses in the startup trial decks and allow you to upgrade them right now, update them again when set 1 of Divines drops, and then a final time in set 2 of Divines. Let's get right into it. So before we get started, just a quick couple of caveats. We'll be going over each of these 6 bosses from the startup trial decks. Unfortunately, the startup trial decks themselves were not the best. The vast majority of the cards that are within that trial deck will not be used. We'll only be focusing mainly on the main grade 3 and using some of the triggers. And that's about it. Some of the cards that are in the trial decks will eventually get effects in Divine Set 1. So you will be able to use those versions of it, but not the ones that you get from the trial decks. And as I mentioned, I'll be giving you 3 lists. One that you can use right now in this point in time before Divine Set 1 comes out. I'll give you a list for Divine Set 1, but that one's going to be a bit more of a budget list using only the cards within Divine's Set 1, as well as up to 2 playsets of cards from before then. Nothing that's higher than a double rare. So it'll be the most budget-friendly version of that deck that I can think of. And then finally, one last version for Divine Set 2, which is basically the strongest that I can make the deck. Other than that, you'll see a couple of information on screen to sort of help you get a quick grasp about how these decks work and whatnot. There will be timestamps for each of them in the description down below. But for example, you'll see a side doc that's similar to this above me and below me. It's similar to the triple drive video that I did if you watched that. But we'll have up here, we'll have listed the deck name or the main boss for that deck, as well as an image of it so you know who I'm talking about. And then below here, you'll have 2 sets of stats that you can look at quickly to just gauge how the deck is. First, we have these 3 categories here, which have a star rating. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Meta is just a measure of how competitively viable I find the deck to be. Diff is short for difficult, which is just how difficult I find the deck to play. And finally, price is how expensive the deck might be, with a rating from 1 to 3, 3 of course being the most, 1 being the least. Then finally, we have here this pentagon here, which has these 5 different sort of attributes for a deck, and we have this sort of blob that will lean more towards a specific attribute, which means that that deck has more of that attribute. I've changed up the categories for these so it makes a little bit more sense for in terms of Vanguard. The first one here is early game, which is just a measure of how good a deck is in the early phases of the game, so how aggressive it can be, not always particularly starting from grade 2, but also taking apart if they're super aggressive on turn 3 as well. Whereas late game is sort of the opposite of that, of how good the deck is in the later stages of the game. Plus here is just how good the deck is at mainly at drawing cards, but just in general of getting resources that you can use, meaningful resources. Control is a measure of how good the deck is at disrupting your opponent, be that by retiring, making them discard, so on and so forth. And finally, peace is just a measure of how peace reliant the deck is, so whether or not you need multiple different specific cards in your hand in order to start your combo going, or if you only use whatever you have and you can still make a game plan out of that. Then the last thing I'll note is that I'll have on screen the deck, and then over there I'll have the deck code, but it'll be in the Japanese version of deck log, because majority of the cards that I'm going over are not out in English. So I will have the Japanese deck code in the description as well, but once the English version comes out, I will update it and add an English deck log as well. For example, I will have them for the first version of the decks before Divines, as those are actually updated now in English, the deck log at least. And the last thing I'll know is that each of the trial deck bosses each have the same first skill, which is the counterblast 1, search a copy of itself from the deck, and then get an additional 10k power to the end of the turn. I won't mention that skill going further, I'll just kind of allude to it and just say like first skill, but just keep in mind that is what the skill is that I'm talking about. But with that, let's actually get into the decks. So we'll start off here with Triumph Dragon from Dragon Empire. Triumph Dragon has a skill that says Energy Blast 4. When it attacks a Vanguard, you can get an additional critical and 5k power, as well as retire one of your opponent's units. This means this deck has some semblance of control and also has a strong Vanguard swing, as if you combine it with the first skill, this is a pretty nice 28k attack with a critical on top of it. So the way we've built the deck is, for most of these, it's just going to be using a lot of generic cards because these decks aren't directly supported. And what we're doing here is we're making use of the order package here. So we got the order package from set 11. These are sets of grade 2 order, grade 2 unit, and grade 1 unit that have some rather useful abilities. So the order says that you can Soul Blast 1, retire one opponent's units. The unit says, the grade 1 unit says here, whenever you play an order, it gets 5k, so it's a 13k attacker and booster, but also it says that you can on place counterblast 1 in order to search out this order here. Then, once you play the order, you can activate the skill of the grade 2. That says if you played an order this turn, when this card is placed, not by a unit's ability specifically, you can Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5, play something that's equal than or less than your Vanguard's grade, or add an order from your top 5 to hand. So it allows you to get this back if you want to use it again for next turn. The reason why this all synergizes is because of mainly her skill, which allows you to, if your opponent has no units in the column in front of her, she gets an additional 10k power. So that makes her a nice hefty attacker. So we want to clear up our opponent's board so we can enable this and also enable the Shinri here. Shinri says that whenever you played an order that turn, or your opponent has one or less rear guards, she gets an additional 5k power when boosting, and at the end of the battle she can go to soul to draw you a card. So this allows you to have soul that can actually use for the Lafayette here, not that you really need it that much, but also mainly allows you to draw cards, and also gives you a nice strong booster. So all 4 of these cards work really well together. We're using here the Oselargest line because it's the best generic ride line for Dragon Empire. What happens here is that the grade 1, if you ride over the grade 0 specifically, you have to use this grade 0. You can search your deck for either left or right arms with a specific name, so we put the shield. And then the grade 2 says that whenever we ride over the grade 1 here, we can add one of these from drop back to our hand. So basically we discard whatever to ride into the grade 1. For the grade 2, we discard the shield and get it back, which you can then use to discard for the grade 3. So you can generate a good amount of hand advantage here, thanks to the Lafayette, thanks to this calling out stuff from your deck, thanks to this calling out a card from your deck that you can then use, and also, you know, having 4 draw triggers here. The last card I'll mention here is this guy here, which I think is like the Iron Stout Dragon, which is a pretty interesting common from set 11 that says when his unit attacks, you can choose an order from your drop to put it on the bottom of your deck, and this unit gets a plus 10k power boost. So you already have this automatically in your drop just by virtue of playing this version of the deck, so you honestly always have access to that. But then you also have access to this order that you can then put on the bottom of your deck, and if you want to, you can search it out again if you really wanted to. So it allows you to just have these nice hefty columns because both of these units here will get an additional 10k power. Then we've got the next version of the deck here. This is for Divine Set 1. I'm using as many cards from Divine Set 1 as possible, limiting myself to only 2 play sets, so 8 cards total of cards from before Divines, and also making sure that they're double rare or less, so making this as budget friendly as possible. So here I'm trying to sort of show a couple of different ways that you can go around with Time Dragon, just because of the fact that I have here, instead of draws, we got here some fronts that you can play instead if you want to go that route, because you do have just the 3 attacks, so you can power them up. That's because you can. We're also got the blue overtrigger instead of the Dragon Empire overtrigger. The reason being is that Triumph Dragon, when he attacks, his crit and power gain is only for that battle. So if you check the Drag Beta and restand the Vanguard, you would have to Energy Blast again to get that power and crit again, which more often than not, given that Energy Blast 4 is a high cost, you're not going to be able to do that. So there are some advantages to playing a different type of overtrigger, such as the blue overtrigger, which gives you another crit that you can put on another unit, or Triumph Dragon if your opponent doesn't guard the attack. It also allows you to add something from your drop. This guy here and these 2 are the cards that are not from Divines. I'm cheating a little bit with this one because this one might be really expensive right now, unfortunately, I don't know. But this is a Gandiva support card. It doesn't specifically name Gandiva, but it just says when either unit's rearguard is retired, after it boosts, you can put this unit and bind it in order to draw 1 card. So whenever you retire, you can go ahead and draw a card off of this. This will combo off really well with the Shinryu, who's not listed here, but you can play that instead if you'd like. And then we got the Brachio Force that was in the previous list that just says on hit, retire one opponent's units and draw a card. So it's just a nifty little card to get some resources and also remove your opponent's cards. The main thing to talk about here is this grade 3. Each of the trial deck bosses got a grade 3 that directly supports them. This one says on plays, you can counterblast 1, draw 1, and when it attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 to get 5k power. But if you Soul Blast a Triumph Dragon specifically from your soul, this gets an extra critical. So you can combo this with this gal here who says on Persona Ride, you can counterblast 1, give the thing that you're boosting an extra critical if it doesn't have already an extra critical. So you can sequence these in the right order if you'd like, but mainly this allows you to have all of your front row attackers have a crit. Because you can have your Triumph Dragon have a crit, you can have this grade 3 Dragon have a crit, and you can have either one of these two on the other rearguard circle to have a crit. One of those support cards that the deck got, each of the trial decks got a grade 2. That was originally in the trial deck, but now has an effect. This one here just says whenever something is retired by Triumph Dragon's effect, it gets plus 10k power. So it's a nice little attacker there that you can definitely combo with this to be 28k and a crit. The last card here is one of these, which I believe was also in the trial deck but as a vanilla. Now it has an effect that says whenever it's discarded for the ride phase, you can call it back out to rear but rested. So this allows you to get sort of a board presence, which works out pretty well with the front triggers here, as it allows you to discard it, bring it back. You won't be able to use it that turn, but next turn you'll have a grade 1 that you can either attack or boost with. But that is the Divine Set 2 list. Also playing copies of the grade 1 from the ride deck, which you can play more of the grade 2 in the ride deck as well. The grade 2 from the ride deck as a main deck unit just says that it gets 10k shield if you have Triumph Dragon, so it's pretty nifty 15k shield. The grade 1 says that it gets 5k attack. When you put these in your ride deck, the grade 1 says when you ride over the grade 2 with it, it allows you to energy blast to draw 1. And then this guy says whenever you ride Triumph Dragon, you energy charge 3, I believe. So, that's that. Then the last list here is for Divines Set 2. So this just takes everything and puts as the best cards that we can to build Triumph Dragon. For the ride deck, we're going to be using the Virginia ride line here because we want the deck to be aggressive in the early game, and this ride line allows us to do that. It's also the best ride line, I think, for Dragon Empire once it comes to Divine Set 2. So the grade 1 says that for each of your units that are on board, he gets a plus 2k power boost, so you can rush your opponent if you go second with this. Then you have here the grade 2 that says an effect that you can't use as a Vanguard, but it says when you ride over it, you can look at the top 7 cards of your deck and add up to any grade 2 from among them to your hand. So this gives you quite a lot of targets, as you can add any copies of this or any copies of this, which you can then extend into something else. You can also add any grade 2 cards. You can actually add any of these two as well. The grade 1 has a skill that says when you ride over it with, I think, any unit, it allows you to, instead of discarding, you can Soul Blast 1 in order to ride. So again, allowing you to establish that hand advantage that we were talking about earlier. Still playing the 4 draw triggers here, and we're playing the Drag Veda over trigger. You can play whichever one you'd like here. I basically want you to just take a look at the list, and then for this final list, just, you know, mix match as many ideas as you'd like. We're playing here against the defensive roar we had in the first list. It just says whenever you guard with something, you can play this Blitz order to give that thing you're guarding with plus 10k and then add it back to your hand at the end of that battle. So you can very easily reuse something like a critical trigger here, give it plus 10k and use it again. Even your over trigger to have basically 2 PGs that turn. We're playing here 2 copies of the cap that just says you can remove 2 copies of cards from your ride deck, put them back face up in the ride deck and draw a card, or get plus 15k shield or 20k shield because it gets plus 15k itself. We're playing here the grade 1 allows you to bind itself and draw. And then the only new card here is this grade 1 support card. We're only playing 2 copies of it. You can play more of it if you'd like, but it just says you can take a copy of your Triumph Dragon either from Solar Drop whenever it boosts, put it on the bottom of your deck. It allows you to then retire one of your opponent's rear guards and then retire itself and draw a card. So you're allowed to draw quite a bit of cards between all of this, even though then we're still playing the draw trigger. You can switch to the front so if you feel like you have enough draw power. Just a lot of it is kind of situational. But other than that, the game plan is generally the same here. And the last thing I have here is just some additional cards that you can consider when it comes to building Triumph Dragon, either right now, set 1 or set 2. Like specifically, this is for set 2. But just some tech cards that you can try and give a shot. Play around with it if you'd like. With that, we'll move on into Dark States here with the Oselargest, who I'm just going to call Ose for now, because I'm not sure how to say that. But he is the boss for Dark States. He has this skill that says when it attacks you, Energy Blast 4, choose a unit from your soul, call it out to rearguard circle, and it gets plus 10k power to the end of that turn. And it's an okay card. Right now, in my opinion, as a Dark States player, I don't think Dark States has the card pool to make the most use of it. But I went ahead and went a little nutty here, using the common cards here from set 11 that have this nice little combo where you have a grade 1 that says on play Soul Blast. Look for any card that has, I forget, something of the Netherworld. Here they have an archetype name to look up for any of those added to your hand. Then we have the grade 3 here, which is going to be your main attacker that you want to pull out from the soul, because it says when it attacks, if you boost it with the grade 1, you soul charge 1, rest the grade 2, and then this unit gets 10k power and a crit. So that combined with this 10k power makes this pretty huge. The grade 2 then has a skill here that whenever it's rested by the grade 3's ability, you can counterblast 1 to re-stand it. We don't really use counterblast for anything else other than the Ose's first skill, so we're free to use that. In order to make sure we get this guy into Soul, we're playing copies of cards like the Zargon, but also more importantly, the Maid here. The Maid works exceptionally well because what you can do is, let's say you don't have this in Soul yet, so you can do is you can attack with this. Then if you do have the Maid in Soul, you can call out the Maid over this, and then with the Maid skill, you can put this back into Soul, and she gets another 15k from that. Likewise, you can attack, you can overcall him with the Maid, and then attack with the Maid, put him into Soul, and then call him out with his skill. So you can combo those off pretty well. Another sort of backup attack here is we have the Orans here, who says essentially same as the Lafayette from the Dragon Empire, but if you played an order, we have the whole order package from set 11 here. If you played an order on place, Soul Blast 1, except from a unit's ability, look at the top 5, choose a unit, call it if it's grade than or less than your Vanguard's grade, and add an order to hand. And if she attacks, you can Soul Blast 3 in order to draw 1 and get 5k. The grade 1 gets 5k if you played an order, and also allows you to search this order on Counterblast 1 on place. And this order just says Soul Charge 1 and give something 5k. At the end of the turn, you can discard 1, add it back to your hand. We're also playing here the Cage of Stars, I think it is, which just says Soul Charge 1, do something from your soul, call it out, give it 5k. So it just allows you to very easily build your board, especially since you'll be soul charging quite a bit. For the ride deck, we'll be using here the Jewel Core Dragon, just to have it as like a backup in your soul. So if like you don't see like this or like this, and you just don't have any good options to call out from your soul, you always have the Jewel Core, who says whenever it attacks or boosts, it gets plus 5k power, and then it goes back into soul. So you can call it out. With this, it'll be a 23k attacker, and then it can just put itself back into soul, so you can have it for use for another attack if you really need it. Other than that, we're playing the draw triggers here to try and plus as much as possible, because we don't really plus other than like the orange skill. That's about it. You're able to get a good amount of resources just from soul, which means you don't have to play as many cards from hand, so it kind of balances out. Next, we've got this list here, which is for Divine Set 1, using as many copies of cards from Divine Set 1 as I can, limiting myself to only using 2 play sets of cards from before Divines, double rare or lower. Those 2 cards here are actually going to be the Zargon, as well as this guy here, whose name I don't remember. We're actually going to only be playing 3 of them. So the Zargon just says whenever this boosts something, you give the thing that it's boosting the ability that if it hits, you choose 2 cards from your drop and put them back into soul. So that allows you to not rely blindly on soul charging as much, basically trying to do some sort of selective soul charging, so that way you can check your triggers, and also as well as, you know, check them to get their effect, but also add them to hand to guard with. Then we've got this grade 2 here, who just says whenever he's played from soul, he gets plus 5k, and whenever he's put back into Soul, I think you can Soul Charge 1. Or something of that sort. So it's just a backup that you can pull out, and he's a common, so he's relatively cheap to get. We got the grade 2 support card. Each of the trial deck bosses got a grade 2 support and a grade 3 support in Divine Set 1. The grade 2 was in the trial deck, but now it actually has an effect in Divine Set 1. The grade 2 just says, whenever it attacks, you counterblast 1. Choose another unit, put it into Soul in order to draw 1 card. So this allows you to very easily attack with a card, put it back into Soul, and then call it back out with Oselargest. Then we got ourselves the grade 3 support card that just says, on place you Soul Blast 2 cards with different names in order to draw a card. Then it also says, whenever it attacks, you Soul Blast 1 to get 5k power, but if you Soul Blast it out in Oselargest, then you can get 15k power instead. So this combos up especially well with this skill because it allows you to just get this huge attacker out. But of course, it's kind of locked to turn 4 because you have to have the grade 3 in Soul. But since you can Soul Charge, you can discard it, it's not that hard to actually pull this off on turn 3, right? With the ride deck, we're using 3 copies of both the grade 1 and grade 2 in the main deck. In main deck, the grade 2 says that it's a 15k shield, and then the grade 1 says that it's a 13k attacker or booster. The grade 1 says, whenever you ride over it with the grade 2, Soul Charge 2, and give your Vanguard plus 5k, so you have a nice Vanguard swing. And then the grade 2 says, whenever you ride over it with Oselargest here, if you have 4 more cards in your Soul, you can draw 1 card, so it allows you to plus a little bit. So, pretty self-exclamatory. The last card we'll go over here is the Persona Ride card from Set 1 that just says you can counterblast 1 if you Persona Rode, choose a card from your Soul and call it out. It gets 10k, and I believe you also Soul Charge to replace it. So it's a nice little card that allows you to call something out. You can then use this to put the card back and then call it out again. So you can get some pretty nice hefty swings with that. Then we've got the last list here, which is, you know, after Divine Set 2. You can take the previous 2 lists and mix and match some cards, whatever is more comfortable for you. We'll go over the ride deck first. For example, you can use the Jewel Core in this spot if you'd like, but I kind of like this ride line. So it just says when you ride over the grade 2, Soul Charge 2, give this 5k, and then when you ride over with the grade 3, this says if you have 4 more cards, draw a card. You have to be kind of careful here because we're playing the Laminia. Laminia says that when you discard her during your ride phase, you can Soul Blast 1, put her on the bottom of the deck in order to draw 1. So you have to make sure you use cards like the Zargon to fill your soul back up. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to use this skill here. We got ourselves here a lot of the usual suspects from the previous list, but most importantly, we got ourselves the new grade 1 here from Set 2. In Set 2, all of the trial deck bosses got a grade 1. The grade 1 says here that you can take a copy of Oselargest either from your Soul or from your drop, put it on the bottom of your deck. If you do so, you can choose one of your own units or one of your opponent's units and put them into their Soul. So you can either do some removal or recycle one of your cards by putting them back into Soul here. But the general game plan remains the same here. You have this as your main attacker, boosted by the power of the main, who can put back to Soul as well as get power itself. She works really well with grade 3s. You can use the grade 2 to put stuff back in as well as get some draw power. And Zargon to get anything from drop that you missed out on. And that's the list. Lastly, here we have a bunch of different cards that you can consider to add into the deck if you'd like. Some of them work out pretty well. Some of them are just depending on your playstyle and whether you like, but there's some pretty decent cards. Some of them you can even use in the ride deck if you'd like. Next up, we'll go over the biggest winner from the trial decks here in Sarevsael. We're just going to call the Angel guy for now because I don't know exactly how to say this. This ends up being the biggest winner, but also then eventually the biggest loser because Sarevsael from Set 1 does everything that he does but better, so this guy just lives infamously in his shadow. But coming out of the trial decks before Set 1, it is the best of the trial decks because of the fact that it has an amazingly good skill. And then it says when it attacks, you Energy Blast 4, choose any card from your drop and call it, and it gets plus 10k power. So that works out really well later on with, you know, all the options you can call out. But right now, the main options that we have here are cards like the dragon here that says whenever it's played by an ability, it gets plus 5k. So this becomes a 25k attacker on its own. But it also says if it's played from deck, you can Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and gets boost. This combos really well with the Drilling Angel that you can use to get yourself some soul, but also here with this card here, the Tetrafold, which is played in basically every single Keter Sanctuary deck right now. And much as I did with the other list here, we're playing the order package for this as well, but we're playing a completely different order from the order package. So typically, this grade 1 says Counterblast 1, search a specific order from your deck and add it to your hand. We're not playing that order specifically. Instead, we're playing this order here. But to finish off with this guy, he also has a skill that says when you play an order, you can have him get 5k. So he's 15k attacker or booster. This order here says you can Counterblast 1, draw 2, play 2 cards out from your hand or discard. And it works out extremely well because it allows you to add a card to your hand. Even if you have to discard, that's fine because you can just call out whatever you discard with the skill of the Vanguard here. We're also using the Tetrafold here, as I mentioned, who just says whenever you play an order that turn, if you play this without using a unit's ability, you can Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5, add an order from among them to your hand, or call a unit with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard to the field. So you can call this dragon out here, and it can allow you to then Soul Blast again in order to draw a card, or you can just call it out and it'll be a nice 15k attacker at that point. We have a lot of ways to superior call in this deck, including our ride deck here, which is the olden line, because it allows you to, generically, it doesn't matter who you ride over it, but you can ride the grade 2 of the grade 1, and it says when that happens, the grade 1 lets you reveal 3 cards from your hand that have different grades, which is pretty easy to do because you will more than often have a grade 2, a grade 1, and a grade 0, which count as different grades. Then you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, call one of them if it's grade 1 or less, or you can call out this card from the right deck, which we typically don't do because we need him for the soul. The grade 2 does the same thing, but allows you to call grade 2 or greater. So it's very easy, allows you to build a board out of nothing, which is the main strength of this deck. And you can very easily do that to rush down your opponent in the early game. This deck doesn't really have an insane amount of late game, but it can just sort of build a board out of nothing. And it can hit some really good numbers, as well as since it can build a board with playing cards that always extend to another card, you tend to generate a pretty good amount of hand advantage, just by sheer value of not playing cards from your hand as much. Next up here, we've got the Divine Set 1 version of the deck. This version is the budget version that I limit myself to only 2 cards, full play sets of 2 cards from before Divines, double rare or lower. Those 2 cards here are going to be the Painkiller Angel, and then also the, I think, Ferocious Knight here. Painkiller says whenever you boost with her, you can Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and then the Knight here says if you have 2 more rear guards than your opponent, you get 10k power. So this is active on turn 2, which allows you to have some really good aggressive turns if you go first, because your opponent will probably not have anything on board at that point. In Divine Set 1, each of the trial deck bosses gets a grade 2 and a grade 3 support card. The grade 2 was originally in the trial deck, but it now has an effect in Divine Set 1, and its effect is really simple. It just says if this is played from drop, it gets plus 10k power. You can actually use this in Sarevsael if you'd like. I really like using this in Sarevsael because it's a nice, real big, beefy grade 2. The grade 3 says, I believe, on place, you Counterblast 1, draw a card, but then it says you Soul Blast 1. If you Soul Blast out this guy, you can either energy charge or counter charge, which is pretty nifty. Then we also have the ride deck, which is, the actual native ride deck. For this guy, the grade 1 says you reveal a card from the top of your deck, and I believe you can either choose to call it or not. And then the grade 2 says, I believe you call a card from your hand, and then if you do, you draw 1. We're playing these in the main deck as well. The grade 2 just says it gets plus 10k shield for 15k total. Grade 1 says that it gets 5k attack for 13k attacker or booster. Then we're playing 1 copy here of this Blitz order that allows you to either guard with the top card of your deck or leave it on the top of your deck. It does cost energy, which I typically try not to use in any of these builds because the Vanguard effect is so energy reliant. But since we have the grade 3 that can allow you to energy charge, I threw this in mainly because I was running out of other cards to play here. Then the last list here is for Divine Set 2. It's kind of an amalgamation of the two previous lists to an extent. The main new card here is the grade 1 support card. Each of the trial deck bosses got a grade 1 support card in Divine Set 2. This one, I believe it says you can take a copy of Sarevsael or whatever the heck from your soul or from your drop, put it on the bottom of your deck. Then you can choose one of your units and give it plus 10k power. So it's kind of whatever. You mainly use it for the cycling of your persona rights. Other than that, we have a lot of the usual suspects here. And the main new card here is this guy here from Divine Set 2. This is a Sarevsael card, but it also says if it's played by your Vanguard's ability, it gets plus 10k power. So you can actually use this in the deck to be a nice 30k attacker. Basically a backup if you don't see this guy, who has essentially more or less the same effect. And other than that, we have here a mixed match of the ride deck. You can do whichever one you like. The reason is that the grade 1 is not dependent on the other grade 2, so you can play whatever you want as a grade 2 slot. So this says whenever you ride over it, the grade 1, choose a reveal 3 cards with different grades, look at the top 5, call a grade 1. If not, call it out. And then this says whenever you ride over it with this guy, you can play a card, draw 1. This guy here allows you to have access to a 15k shield if you really need to. So you can call that out from your drop and then guard with it if you ever really need to, in cases where you have like low shield or something like that. So I just thought it was a nice nifty option to show, but you don't have to put this in the right deck if you don't want to. Then lastly here, we have a couple of other options that you can play, either in the main deck or some even in the ride deck if you'd like, just to give you a couple of different options, different ways to play the deck. Next up, we have Asturm here from Brankgate. This one's kind of interesting. It says whenever the Vanguard attacks, Energy Blast 4. Choose another one of your units, stand it, and both the unit that you restood and the Vanguard get plus 5k. There will be an order in set 1 that works alongside this effect. We don't have access to that until set 1. We don't really have a lot to go on until set 1, so we're kind of going a sort of opposite direction that you'll see later on, where we're playing monster cards. So there's a couple of cards here, this one, this one, this one, this one, and even this PG that have monster in their name, which are used for a completely different deck, which is where this ride line comes from. But mainly you can use this order card here that says when you play it, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose 2 cards with monster in their name, add 1 to your hand, add the other 1 to your drop. So this allows you to thin out your deck, but also gets you access to your cards. It also has another effect that isn't as relevant, but you can use the ride deck here, which just says whenever you ride over it with the next one of the ride deck, you can look at your deck for the order. So every turn you can play the order, which is really nice. The main thing that's really nice about playing this order, other than allowing you to search out your monster cards, like the PG for example, is that you can use the Combine Rusher, who is going to be the main attacker for this deck. Combine Rusher 1 says that if it's in drop, if you play an order, you can a set order from your hand, you can counterblast 1, call it out. But also, whenever it attacks, it can get plus 10k power if you have 2 set orders. So you can use the fact that you automatically get 2, unless you go to damage, in order to power up this guy and then call him out whenever you need to. Other than that, everything else is kind of just utility. We have here as our backup attacker here the Bent Robots, who can also get plus 10k power, but it can also counterblast 1 to search out one of these orders in case you need an extra one. We can also use the monster in the Bobomine, who allows you to countercharge as well as get some soul, which you can then use with this little goblin. This goblin here, it says you can choose a card from your drop that I believe is non-trigger, put it on the bottom of your deck, and if it's a grade 3, you can Soul Blast 1, draw 1. So this allows you to cycle out the grade 3. You can put that back into the deck. You can also put this guy, discard him, put him back into the deck as well. The last 2 cards here, this guy just says whenever he's put from drop by an ability, you can counterblast 1, call it out. So it's somewhat similar to the Combine Rusher, not really. Kind of just have him there for the monster name. You can play any of the other monsters that you like. And the last one here, he just says you can choose a monster, put it into your order zone, which doesn't really matter. But also, if you have 2 or more research order, he gets plus 5k shield. So it's a nice 10k shield that you can play in the deck. So next up, we've got the list from Divine Set 1. For this list, I'm limiting myself to only using 2 cards, 2 full play sets of those cards from before Divines, and they have to be double rare or less. Everything else is from Divine Set 1. In this case, the 2 older cards are the Bobo Mine and also this guy here, and I had to cheat and make a third one here. So I had to break my rule a little bit here just because it's a little bit tough to make this deck work. So these all 3 have the same sort of general purpose. Bubble Mine says that whenever it boosts, if you have a set order, it goes to Soul, you countercharge 1. And then this guy says whenever you play a set order, you can retire him to countercharge 1. And finally, this guy says here whenever you play a grade 2 or greater set order, you can put him to Soul to draw 1 card. So we're using that to make up for the fact that Asturm doesn't really get a lot of advantage at all in the deck. If you'd like, you can swap out one of these for copies of the Ride Deck card. But what Asturm focuses on is this grade 2 set order here. That says every time you play it, you have to counterblast 1 to play it. Then it says, if a card is stood by your Vanguard's ability, both those cards get an additional 5k power. So you can stack this effect to plus the Vanguard's effect to give whatever you restand plus 15k power, and just keep stacking that effect as you go on. The Ride Deck here is a native Asturm Ride Deck, which just allows you to search out the grade 2 set order, similar to the previous line we talked about. And our main focuses of doing damage to our opponent are in this grade 2 and this grade 3 here. In Divine Set 1, each of the trial deck bosses got a support grade 3 and a support grade 2 that was originally in the trial deck and got an effect this time. So the grade 2 just says whenever it's stood by Asturm's ability, it gets plus 10k power. So that stacks on top. So it'll get 5k from the Vanguard, 5k from a set order, and in its own 10k. So even if you just have 2 of these, it'll get a nice 15k, 25k in that first turn. And then you have yourself here this grade 3, who just says on place counterblast 1, but also when it attacks, soul blast 1 to get plus 2. But if you soul blast an Asturm specifically, this can restand itself. So it allows you to get 5 attacks if possible. It's kind of tough to pull it off, to be honest. The reason that this deck is so tough is that you have to play this set order. If you don't do too much, but it's also counterblast 1 each time, and you don't gain any value from it. You don't draw or anything like that. Which makes it kind of rough, which is why we're playing stuff like this to try to make up for that advantage. And these 2, so you still have the counter charge, can't get counter blast denied or anything like that. The last list here is for Divine Set 2, and the deck sort of stabilizes a lot better because we have so many ways to counter charge now. So in Divines Set 2, the deck gets its own dedicated grade 1 that basically just says take Asturm from Solar Drop in order to counter charge 1 by putting it at the bottom of your deck. We're going to be playing 2 of these because we don't see it as often. There's this guy, which is amazing in Brandgate, who just says on place you can Soul Blast 2, choose 1 of 2 skills. Either you countercharge 1 or you choose a card from a set order from your deck added to your hand. Both skills are insanely good for this deck. We see the return of Bowling Mine. We're still playing 1 of this guy, which you can drop if you'd like, but I'm just using him to try and get some sort of hand advantage here. If we reduced the number of critical triggers here, just to try and throw in some fronts, so we can actually have some shield value, since again we don't plus a lot, so we want whatever cards we have in our hand to have some good value. We're also playing here this guy here, the Habitable Zone. Whenever you discard him, you can Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and then put the card you discarded, Habitable Zone, on the bottom of your deck. Because this allows you to just get some advantage early on. It also allows you, if you Persona Ride and you play this, you can counterblast 1, search a set order from your deck, add it to your hand, and this turn you can play an additional set order or an order than usual, and also the first one you play is 1 less counterblast. So it allows you to bypass the cost of this and just play it, which is kind of nice. And other than that, it's the same usual suspects in the grade 2 and the grade 3. You want to use those to get your attacks in. But Asturm is a very interesting deck. It doesn't really have much of an early game anymore. It kind of had one before Divines, but then it just becomes sort of a late game deck where it has a really strong late game. It can get 2 massive swings, but that's about it. It's very piece reliant, does not plus insanely a lot. Only in this build you kind of plus a bit, but that's about it. And lastly, we have here some support cards that you can use to swap out from some of the cards that I've talked about in the other builds if you'd like. Next up, we have the trial deck from Stoicheia, Cristianos, who I feel like I know the most about here. And I feel like I've maybe pioneered the way to play it. So this one is Cristianos here. He has a very simple skill that just says, act, so not in battle, you energy blast 4, take the top 2 cards of your deck, put them into your drop, then choose any 2 units and call them out. You don't get power or anything like that. So what this does is that it allows you to do a couple of interesting things. It allows you to constantly reuse the same amount of rear guards, and it also allows you to play a deck that sort of focuses on filling up your drop zone, which we have a lot of cards that sort of benefit and enable you to fill up your drop zone, but we've never had a huge payoff until now. The main payoff for this deck is this here, the Nectar. This is a normal order that you can play. It says choose one of your units, and for every 5 cards in your drop, it gets an additional 5k power, but if you have 15 cards, it gets an additional critical as well. So you can hit some insane numbers, especially later on with this card. And one of the main things that we can do is combo it with this guy here. This grade 2 says whenever it is placed by an ability, if you played an order this turn, you can retire it, choose an order from your drop, add it back to your hand. So it very easily allows you to bring back the Nectar for using it next turn. The other main attacker we have here is this Dragon, who just says if you have 8 or more cards in your drop, when it says played, it gets plus 10k power. This is either from hand or if you play it from drop. So it's a nice 20k attacker for this deck basically all the time. And then we also have here the Tidelight Dragon, who kind of does the same thing, who says if you Persona Robe this turn, you can Soul Blast 1, choose a unit, both the unit you chose and Tideline get plus 10k power. You can sometimes call out 2 Tidelines with Cristiano skill, Soul Blast 2, give them both 20k. On top of the Persona Ride makes them 40k. Then one of the biggest cards for this deck is the Philander. Philander says on place, look at the top 5, choose any card, put it into your drop. So that fills up your drop with any of these other units that you can call out, but also sets up your drop with the number of cards that you need. Also says if you have 10 or more cards in your drop, he gets plus 10k power. So he's an 18k attacker or booster. The last card here we have is the Saber Shark, or Surging Shark Fans or something like that. This won't be as useful in this version of the build, but it'll become a lot more better in the other versions. But it just says that this can't be played normally. If you play it normally, it retires itself. But it's a grade 1 with 15k attack. So you can call this out with Cristiano's skill if you'd like, and then play this for your hand, for example, and it gives Cristianos a huge column to attack with, because he'll become 28k boosting it, and then Cristianos goes up to 38k if you use the first skill. The last cards we'll go over here is the somewhat notorious Ride deck from Zorga with the Rancor Chain of Black Tear's Hostage Dragon. Rancor Chain says you can Soul Blast 1 when it's the Vanguard to draw 2 cards, discard 1 order. If not, discard 2 orders if you don't have an order to discard. Then the Black Tear's Hostage Dragon says whenever it's rooted, you can choose an order from your drop, add it to your hand. So we're mainly trying to search out here the Nectar. And we're playing here some of these orders here to make sure we can get this first skill, but if we have to discard, it's not the worst thing in the world because that fills up our drop. But we're mainly playing Blitz orders, which I have to remind you, you cannot get back with the skill of Black Tear's House Dragon. If you discard this for Rancor Chain, you cannot get it back because Black Tear's only adds normal orders. But because of the fact that Cristianos doesn't plus insanely a lot, we want to make sure, again, whatever cards we have in our hand have a lot of value and have a lot of shield value. So we're playing Blitz orders to compensate for that and also work alongside the skill of the Rancor Chain. Next up, we have here the list from Divines Set 1, where it's sort of like a budget build where I limit myself to using all the cards from that specific Divine Set 1 set, and up to 2 full play sets of 2 cards from before Divines that are double rare or less. We're using here these 2 here, the Nectar and the Grade 2, that allows you to get the Nectar because it's very important for the deck. The other important parts here are the ride line, which are actually pretty good. So this says here, the Grade 1, when you ride over with the Grade 2, you can draw 2, discard 2, so that helps you fill out your drop. It's a pseudo Rancor Chain without having to play orders. Then the Grade 2 is really cool. Whenever you play Cristianos over it, you just choose a card from your drop and call it, which is really nice because it allows you to get the sharks, the saber sharp surging fangs, or whatever that I talked about in the previous list. So it allows you to instantly have that. But the main thing for this deck is the grade 2 and grade 3 support cards that we got from Divine Set 1, because each of the trial decks got a supporting grade 2 and grade 3 that specifically support them. The grade 2 was originally in the trial deck, but it had no effect. The grade 2 just says here, when it's called from drop, I believe specifically by Cristianos effects, it gets plus 10k power. Then the grade 3 says that on place, you can Soul Blast 1, it gets 5k power, but if you Soul Blast out Cristianos, it can restand itself after it attacks. So you can use that in combination with the Nectar to get some pretty big attacks that also have a crit on them, which is the main, goal of the deck now, is to aim to get this guy as big as possible and attack with a crit twice. Other than that, we have some cards here. This is just 2 copies because I need to fill out the deck a little bit, that whenever you discard it, you call it out from drop, but it says rest. It's a grade 1. It's alright. We're also playing here 3 copies of the Persona Ride Cycler from set 1 that says you can counterblast 1 if you Persona Road. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. I believe you call 1, put the rest on your drop zone, which is alright, fills up your drop. But we're kind of restricted that we don't have a lot of the good cards we talked about in the previous list. And we're trying out a couple of different ways to play the deck here. So we're playing fronts instead of draws, so you can get a sense of how that feels like. And then playing the red over trigger here, because it, typically you attack with Cristianos first, other than attacking with this guy. So the red over trigger just says whenever you check it, you choose one of your rear guards. If it's standing, it gets the ability that at the end of the battle that it attacks, you stand it again. So that allows you to get quite a bit of multi-attack. Works out really well with this, because that's 3 attacks with big number and crit. Then we got ourselves the last list here for Cristianos for set 2 that combines everything that we went over previously. So we have ourselves also this new grade 1 here support card. Each of the trial decks get a grade 1 support card in set 2. This one says here that it can choose a Cristianos from Soul or Drop, put on the bottom of your deck in order to draw 1. After you counterblast and retire it. This skill is kind of nice because very often than not, you might actually get your Cristianos in drop in the early game from just milling and doing stuff. So you can actually use this to put it back and draw a card, which is pretty nifty. We're using here the Nectar and the grade 2 that gets you the Nectar because they're pretty important, as well as the grade 2 that gets power and the grade 3 that can restand and also get power, which is really nice. I might have mentioned that he gets power, but no, I believe he gives Cristiano power instead. We have the return of Philander here as well. We're playing the red over trigger to try and maximize this combination of cards here. We have the return of the Blitz orders to try and be a little bit more defensive. We have a copy of the Ghost Chase here, just as a bit of a utility, because what you can do with the Ghost Chase is if you're in a really tough situation, you can go ahead and use Cristiano's skill to bounce, let's say, a PG from your drop zone back onto the field, boost with it, and then use the Blitz order to bounce it back and guard with it. If it's something that you need, you can swap this out for something else if you'd like. We have the Surging Sharp Fangs here, who works with the grade 2, who you can very easily just call this out whenever you get it, and it just becomes discard fodder because you can constantly call it out. It becomes a 15k booster as long as you call it out from drop or from deck. And with Philander, that's an 18k booster as well, so you get some really huge columns. You can really make the deck work because it allows you to very easily fill up your drop, get 15 or more cards, use the Nectar, which you can recycle with this guy, to put onto this guy in order to, whenever it attacks, it swings in with big numbers of like 60, 50, 70, 80k, and then it can restand to do that again after your Cristianos attacks. And lastly, we're playing here 4 draws, just because I feel like the deck doesn't really plus a lot. You might end up decking out as well if you go crazy with the milling, so be careful, but it does allow you to get some sort of hand. Lastly, here are some additional cards that you can put into the deck if you'd like. You can swap out some of these cards and put them in the deck. They work out pretty well. Last but not least, we have Lyrical Monasterio with Marlean. Lyrical, who's finally included with everyone in the game here. We're saving her for last, and we'll try not to rush through her. So she's a pretty interesting one because she says when she attacks you, Energy Blast 4. Choose a unit, bring it back to your hand, a rear guard, bring it back to your hand, and then call something out from your hand to open a rear guard circle, and that gets plus 10k power. So this allows you to abuse on-place abilities because you can very easily play it from your hand, bounce it back with your skill, play it again. This list here is sort of not doing as much of that. It's making use of this girl here, who just says whenever a card is put back into your hand by your Vanguard ability, you can counterblast one, put her into Soul to draw a card, and then call out a grade 3 from your hand. So you can get 5 attacks this way. And the way this works out is essentially you will play out this girl, who is from the trial deck of Lyrical, the first trial deck for Lyrical, and it says whenever this is played, it gets 10k to the end of the turn, but she's 10k based, but she's a grade 3, so she's a 20k attacker, and you play this girl. You go ahead and swing in with both of them. Then what happens is you use Marlean's skill to bounce this one back to your hand, and you can go ahead and play this girl, who says whenever she's played by your Vanguard ability, she gets plus 10k power. Then you can use this skill to go into Soul, counterblast draw 1, and then play this grade 3 again, who says whenever she's played, she gets plus 10k. So you get some pretty nice columns from the fact that these two get plus 10k, and Marlean also gives them power. And then you can go ahead and use the Eureka here, who just says whenever she boosts something at the end of that battle, you can Soul Blast 1, return that card to your hand. So you can boost either one of these or both of them if possible, bounce them back, put them back into your hand to do that again next turn. Which, you know, works out pretty well. We have some here, some backup grade 3s that you can use as well. One of these gives you a little bit of protection because it has to be the one that gets targeted by effects, and also if it hits, it counter charges. And this girl says whenever she attacks, you choose, you look at the top 2, put one into Soul, put one into hand, I believe, or something like that. Oh no, you put a card from your hand into Soul, so look at the top 2, put it on the top or bottom, or put one into your hand. We're using here the Willista ride line, which is a pretty good generic line for Lyrical. The grade 1 says when you ride over a grade 2, doesn't have to be this one specifically, but when you ride over a grade 2, you can put a card from your hand into Soul to then search out this card here. You can choose out any gem, but we're going to use this one because it counts as 2 gems. And this says whenever it's played, if you have Willista, specifically, you can put it to Soul, draw a card, give your Vanguard plus 5k. And then this says whenever you play gem, you draw a card. So this allows us to early game go through our deck pretty easily and fill up our Soul. As you know, this puts cards in Soul and this puts itself into Soul. So that allows us to use the Eureka as much as we'd like. And that's about it. That's the general consensus of the deck. Next up here, we have the list from set 1, which is a bit of a budget version here. I try to restrict myself to only using 2 cards from the previous sets, a full play set of those 2, but everything else is from Divine Set 1. So, in Divine Set 1, we got quite a couple of things here, especially considering that we've got a Lyrical boss that also comes out. You can actually use some of the cards in this deck. So we have here the new ride deck that has a pretty interesting effect. The grade 1 says when you ride over the grade 2 with it, you can call out a card from your hand, then you choose a card from your deck with the same name as that and add it to your hand. So you can actually use this to call out your PGs to get another PG. The grade 2 then says that you can choose a card from your field and add it back to your hand, so you can get that PG back, and then I believe it calls itself out. We can also play these in main deck, where the grade 2 gets plus 10k shield, so it becomes 15k shield. Grade 1 gets plus 5k attack, so it's a 15k attacker or booster. And we've got these new cards here from Divine Set 1, which is a grade 2 and a grade 3, because each of the trial deck bosses got a grade 2 and grade 3 support card. The grade 2 was in the trial deck, but did not have an effect. I feel like I've said this a billion times, but I just wanted to say it in case people were skipping around, only watching a specific part of the video for whatever nation. The grade 2 just says, I believe when it's played by Marlean's ability, it gets plus 10k. And then this girl says, whenever she's placed, you can counterblast 1 to draw, but also when she attacks, you can Soul Blast 1, she gets 5k. But if you Soul Blast out Marlean, she gets plus 15k. She becomes a nice attacker that you can constantly reuse with her effect, if you have the soul to use it. This card here is pretty decent. It just says if you have different card names, she gets plus 10k. So you kind of just use her as an extra backup attacker for this girl. This girl here is actually kind of interesting. In the previous builds for Divine Set 1, I kind of just throw these in to fill up space because their effect is okay. But it actually works out pretty decently in Lyrical, because we have this and this, which make up the order package for Lyrical. A lot of the other nations got this in Set 11. But what we do is we have a grade 1 order that says you choose one of your units. At the end of the turn, you can return it to your hand. And also, at the end of the turn, you can discard a card to add the order back to your hand. And this girl says the grade 1 unit says you can on place counterblast 1, search out the order, add it to your hand, and also if you played an order, she gets plus 5k attack. So she becomes a 5k attacker or booster. You can use this with this girl, who says if you discard her for your ride, you can call her back out and rest her. So what you can do is you can technically just keep reusing her, because you can discard her for ride, put her on the field, use this to get this order, play it with this, and then you can bounce this back to your hand, which you can then discard again to use for the order. She doesn't come back that time if you discard it for the order, but you can essentially use that constantly to keep cycling out that same card. Finally, we have ourselves the last list here, which is for Divine Set 2. This is a bit of a mismatch of the first set and some of the second set here, as we're using the same mechanic here with this grade 2 that focuses on grade 3s, a lot of the same grade 3s here as well. Except we've dropped the Cal fee because we have our own dedicated grade 3 that we can use. It's more soul intensive, but you can choose whichever one you'd like. We have this support card here from Divine Set 2 that just says it can choose one of your cards and bounce it back to your hand, which is really nice because it works really well with the Yuika. We have this, which is the Vachblan, which is a really expensive card, unfortunately, but it says whenever you discard it, you Soul Blast 1, draw a card. If you do it in ride phase, you discard in ride phase, then you choose her, put it on the bottom of your deck. But also, if you play her from your hand in Persona Road, you can counterblast 1 and give your Vanguard, I believe, or you the player, the ability that your front row gets plus 5k power. You can actually use this twice if you use it with her skill, because I believe it's on place. So you can use the skill twice if you use her, bounce it in hand, and then use her again. The last new card here we have is the grade 1 support card. Each of the trial deck bosses got a grade 1 supporting card here. This one just says that you can choose one from one of the Marleans that you have in your drop in your soul, put it on the bottom of your deck, and then if you do that, you choose a card from your drop that has the same name, I believe, as one of your units, grade 2 or greater, and add it to your hand, which is an okay skill. But other than that, it's the same general game plan. You know, you play whichever one. Honestly, I believe you play this and this, right? You bounce the grade 3 with the skill of Marlean in order to play this. Who gets power? You put this into soul in order to play this again, right? And that's the general list. Lastly, here are all the additional cards you might be able to consider for Marlean. If you'd like, you can play many of these in the deck and it'll probably work out pretty well. Well, that'll do it for the trial deck bosses and how you can upgrade your startup trial decks. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any thoughts about it down below, or if you build your deck differently, or just in general, anything you might have to say. I know these weren't the best product that has been released, but you gotta work with what you got, I guess. And if this is what you've got, hopefully this allows you to upgrade them and actually enjoy Vanguard. But till next time, take care of yourselves and each other, play Vanguard, and have yourselves a damn good one.